Good morning and welcome to the webinar today. I'm the organizer of this event from the Pilot magazine. My name is Jonathan Benton. Before we get going, I'd just like to say welcome to the GoToWebinar platform. For today's event, you'll see the speakers display with webcams across the top of the page and below the presentation itself. And should you have any questions, you can submit them to the chat feature and we'll collate all the questions at the end and put them to the panel. Okay, now without any further ado, I give over to Mr. Volkan.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope it works now, but we tested it, so there shouldn't be a problem. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for organizing this event. I think the current pandemic has shown us that we, as the European Union, are not sufficiently prepared for the worst case scenarios, and that we need to act now to adapt to such kind of situations. The crisis puts our healthcare systems under extreme pressure, but this could only be the foretaste of what we could expect from a world where antimicrobials are no longer effective. Let me be clear. AMR is a global public health threat whose impact and proportions have the potential to kill millions of people. As such, to combat AMR, we need a coordinated European and global answer. The 2019 published special report from the Court of Auditors on AMR makes clear that we have to act on this topic quickly. Due to infections in hospitals and other healthcare settings, up to 33,000 people die within the European Union or the European Economic Area every year. In the report on the UN Secretary General's high-level panel of access to medicines, experts warn that drug-resistant viruses, bacteria, parasites, and fungi could cause 10 million deaths a year worldwide by 2050. Just like the coronavirus, AMR does not respect borders, and countries need to coordinate their actions with the rest of the world. Still, we see very little is being done, unfortunately, to combat this global health threat. The growing rate of AMR combined with an insufficient pipeline for new antibiotics is very concerning to me. There's an obvious market failure in investing in research and development of new antibiotics. The current system is designed to generate profit for pharmaceutical companies, and the industry is failing to deliver on new health technologies for treatments that simply do not and cannot promise high returns of invest. AMR therefore represents a commercial dilemma for the private sector, as the development of a new drug is very cost intensive, and the new drug would need to be used as little as possible, hence not bringing in any or very less profit. We can see that the private sector will not be solving this problem on their own, and that special interventions to address the situation is urgently needed. This is also the reason I joined the MEP interest group on AMR. We aim to push this topic during this legislation and put pressure on the Commission to come up with a proposal that not only gives guidelines but puts forward a mandatory action, as the uptake of the Commission's recommendation is, for me, not satisfying at all. So therefore, I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today and would now like to take the opportunity to introduce our first speaker, Lord Jim O'Neill. He is not only a former chief economist of Goldman Sachs and a former UK Treasury Minister, but also chaired between 2014 and 2016 the UK review on AMR. His combined expertise with regards to economics and AMR seems an ideal basis for most valuable insights and ideas concerning the AMR market failure. So, Lord Jim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Timo. Good day to everybody, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share some thoughts. and indeed listening to Timo's comments, let me congratulate you for actually focusing on this equally urgent need alongside COVID-19. I'll try to make some very brief remarks in the 10 minutes I have, and perhaps lead to some questions later when the time is right. So the first thing to say, which is kind of stating the obvious, but it's very, very relevant to the AMR challenge and my own experiences, both during leading the review and subsequently, and indeed sort of highlights why, given my background as an economist and a business person, I was asked to do it. And that first comment is COVID-19 and the chaos it has caused to people's livelihoods and our economies, in addition to the health issues, completely smashes this frequent, almost artificial separation between matters of health and matters of economics and finance. And as we experienced as part of our initiatives to try to raise the AMR issue to international economic and finance policymaker levels, which ultimately we had some success in playing our role in getting on the G20 finance and leaders agenda. Many, many people in finance and those responsible for running economic policy have not regarded AMR as a priority policy. And in that sense, and in the spirit of never letting a crisis go to waste, in my judgment, this COVID-19 outbreak, as horrific as it is, can only be helpful. Second thing to say in that regard, and following on from Timo's comments, highlighting more what you said about in Europe today, it is estimated that around 33,000 people are dying every year from diseases related to drug-resistant infections. But in the context of COVID-19, and to emphasize, as obviously many people on this call do know, but maybe some don't fully appreciate, as of about 3 hours ago, using the Johns Hopkins webpage that updates by 3 hours the number of rolling total of the number of people that have died, it stands at 386,111 as of this morning European time, which is horrific as it is actually probably about half the number of people that are dying from antimicrobial resistance today around the world. And for Timo's number of 33,000, let me also highlight that actually is about 8,000 higher than what was the standard assumption that we used during our review from 2014 to 2016. Whether that is due to better data quality or actually rising infections is not clear to me, but if you translated that same number into a percentage change globally, it would be not far short of 1 million people dying already today from drug-resistant infections around the world. So certainly on a scale which is comparable to COVID-19, which of course, as we see, and ironically, actually on the same day as this, there is a volunteering major fundraising event to support money for Gavi for further vaccines. And frankly, from the amounts of money that are being thrown at COVID-19, as important as they are, particularly in terms of the economic support of the consequences, they are literally peanuts in terms of the monies that we suggested are needed to stop antimicrobial resistance being such a problem. The next point I would also like to emphasize is something that Timo touched on. If anything, in the period since our review finished in 2016, despite an enormous amount of attention to our review and many of our initiatives, particularly on the failed market for new antibiotics, the situation has got gravely worse. Not only has there been more major pharmaceutical companies that have essentially exited the market. There is probably less than 5 globally today that treat the business vaguely seriously. But increasingly worryingly, there has, of course, been a significant collapse of those active people in the biotech or early stage market for the very key stages of really focusing on new drugs. And in that context, we need urgent initiatives to do something about it. And again, relating it back to my first point, what more clarity would anybody want than the horrific lives that we are all enduring right now and the interruptions to our lives? And unless we do something in advance to stop using antibiotics so inappropriately and to start finding new ones that work, as well as vaccines that are relevant for antimicrobial resistance, and also new diagnostics, we are going to be in an even bigger mess in the future about AMR than we are with COVID-19. To add to the challenge, and in marked and worrying contrast to the global coordinated response to the economic and financial crisis of 2008, we don't seem to really have international cooperation going on here through policymakers, with the effective collapse of the G20, greatly because of the what I would describe rather odd stance of the current US administration, and particularly the difficulties with their leadership about involving any international cooperation involving China, which itself adds to the complication of how we're going to end up with equally distributed and fairly distributed vaccines for COVID-19, and certainly adds to the effective ways of exploring new models that work for financing antimicrobials. Which leads me to the last 2 points I would like to make for now. I'm aware that the very interesting title for this session is a requirement for a new business model for the development of new antibiotics and related. And the urgency of the need is so vast that I welcome all initiatives, including what might be regarded as rather unconventional ones. And indeed, as I'm sure many people know, about a year ago, I started to make public comments about maybe how we in fact need some kind of government-owned entity to start it, given that there didn't appear to be any incentives for the private sector world. And certainly, I would suggest if we do not see some new initiatives in the next few months coming out of the pharmaceutical world or policymakers, then this idea of some kind of official producer of antibiotics by default becomes more attractive. However, let me finish in this regard in highlighting something that, to my surprise, coming out of the United States, might be an interesting development, which should also be something, if it were true, that the EU itself should definitely consider focusing on. And I believe it's right to describe it as the Pasteur Act, which is indeed spelt in the same way as Louis Pasteur. And I gather that in the next, before this month is over, there will be a bill attached to, or an amendment attached probably to one of the COVID-19 recovery programs that will be discussed in Congress, that effectively is going to propose almost exactly what we suggested with our so-called market entry rewards, which would provide a significant sum of money in order to incentivize pharmaceutical companies to indeed start treating this business more seriously. And I have no idea whether that is likely to pass or not, but frankly, it is almost definitely the most interesting specific development I have seen in the now 3 years since my, the now 4 years since our formal recommendations were completed. And so with that, let me stop for now, and I look forward to hearing what others have to say in the discussion and Q&A afterwards. Thank you.
So, yeah. Thank you very much, Jim, for these very interesting views and ideas. And now it's my pleasure to introduce a representative from the European Commission's DG Research and Innovation, Ms. Norstedt, who is Director of the People Directorate. We are very grateful to have you here with us and look forward to hearing your DG's take on AMR innovation. We understand you have another appointment soon and that you in the Q&A session, your colleague, Mr. van Hengel, will address any questions, if any. So I won't waste more time and will pass the floor directly to you. Thanks for being here. The floor is yours, Ms. Norstedt.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, everybody. So thank you for inviting me to participate in this meeting on a very important topic indeed. I'm sorry I can't be with you web streamed. We have some technical issues, but I'm happy at least that I can be with you over the phone. So as already have been mentioned, COVID-19 has really made us all aware how important it is to prevent and treat infectious diseases. And effective antimicrobials are crucial to treat infectious diseases. They are a cornerstone of our health systems, and AMR is undermining that cornerstone. So thank you, Lord O'Neill, for the comprehensive UK review on antimicrobial resistance that you shared. This review has greatly helped us to make the problem of AMR much more visible, and it also provided valuable input when we developed the European second AMR action plan. As you know, this plan was launched in 2017 and motivated by the need for EU to play a leading role in the fight against AMR and also to add value to member states' actions. Our European One Health Action Plan lists many actions to reduce AMR. One of the three pillars on which this plan builds aims to boost research, development and innovation on AMR, and this has led to a large number of EU-funded research actions. It strengthens our investments in R&D, which started in 1999, and by the end of Horizon 2020, we estimate that we have actually invested around 1.9 billion euros in the area of AMR. One major element in fighting AMR is, of course, developing new antimicrobials. For this, we are supporting activities and work in partnership with the pharmaceutical industry through the Innovative Medicines Initiative. For example, the IMI's New Drugs for Bad Bugs program and its AMR accelerator have invested around 950 million euro in the development of new antimicrobials. Around half of that budget comes from the EU, and the other half are investments through the pharmaceutical sector. To make antimicrobial development more attractive, we need, however, to reduce the development costs and the time for development. And therefore, we're also supporting the establishment of a sustainable European-wide clinical study network for infectious diseases through our call in the 2020 work program of health that currently is open. And also, of course, the current pandemic has further stressed the need for this pan-European clinical trials networks. This would provide a platform for rapid conduct of clinical trials. The network should address all aspects of clinical trials and is expected to develop innovative research approaches as well as flexibility for responding to unpredictable events. This network would also speed up development of the urgently needed treatments and diagnostics and thereby reduce the development costs. With regard to tackling the antibiotic market failure, DG Research and Innovation, we work very closely together with other DGs, in particular with our colleagues in DG Santé, where we investigate innovative approaches that may link the development with procurement, for example, through innovation partnerships. We also need to take into account the latest development on treatments and vaccines for COVID-19. We also work with DG DevCo, as AMR is an even bigger threat in developing countries. Let me assure you that our commitment to invest in AMR research will continue also in Horizon Europe. Together with the member states, we are now co-developing our new framework program, Horizon Europe, which will contain new opportunities to support AMR research. But the challenge is really big, and we therefore have to work hand in hand with partners. Therefore, under Horizon Europe, we are planning to join forces with industry through the Innovative Health Initiative, which is proposed, with member states through a foreseen One Health AMR partnership that would build on the joint programming on AMR and also the One Health European Joint Program. We also would like to join forces with Africa through the proposed EU-Africa Global Health Partnership, and with other countries around the globe through the Global AMR R&D Hub, which we support to maximize the impact of the existing and new antimicrobial basic and clinical research initiatives, as well as product development. Our continued investment, our commitment to further strengthen AMR research coordination, in combination with our readiness to enter into partnership with others, should allow us to strengthen the impact of Europe's research to protect the health of our citizens. You will also hear more about the Commission's work in the area from my colleague Florian Schmidt from DG Santé, who will speak a little bit later today. As already mentioned, unfortunately, I will have to leave this meeting due to prior engagement, but my colleague Arjon van Hengel from my directorate, who has a very long-standing experience in the area of AMR and AMR research, will stay on and participate in the discussion, and he may also respond to any questions you may have. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Irene Norstedt. I think it's really important that you highlighted that it's an international threat we have to tackle with aligned forces. So I really like this view. Thank you very much. Now it's my pleasure to introduce my co-host and colleague, Peter Liese, who is chairing the next panel of our webinar today. As you may know, Peter is a fellow German from the group of the European People's Party, and he is also a member of the ENVI committee, and he is the coordinator for the EPP group in this committee. So it's my pleasure to hand over to you, Peter. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Timo. And in fact, it's the second time that we share a video conference in the last 8 days, and I very much appreciate this cooperation. I think we are in difficult times, but we are also in the times with a lot of opportunities. People are alerted that health is important, and Europe has a role to play in health policy. That's why I'm not of the opinion that we need to somehow underestimate Corona to make our issue bigger. I experienced this also in the conference last week, when you count people dying and say, oh, I have even more people dying than Corona, so I'm more important. I don't think this is the right approach, because in fact, we have only 300,000 people dying from Corona, according to official figures. There's also a big underreporting, especially in developing countries. But we have only 300,000 people because we took the measures. And I think that is the lesson to learn. We need to take measures to avoid people dying from infectious diseases. Corona would be a much bigger problem without the measures. And that's why also we need to look at the measures that we take to stop antimicrobial resistance. We just come from a meeting of the Environment and Health Committee with the Agriculture Commissioner, and there the issue was raised. I think it's difficult to just blame agriculture, because there is a problem in agriculture, but we have already regulated veterinary medicine in the European Union. We should do it better. I'm in favor of reducing agriculture use in animals, but the human medicine, first of all, unprudent use of antibiotics. Doctors and patients should behave better. And when you look at the legal base When we can regulate veterinary medicine, we can also regulate prudent use in human medicine. Legal base is 114 and 168. Politically, it's difficult, but maybe in this new time, we could also look at this. Definitely, if member states wouldn't regulate and wouldn't challenge, wouldn't take the challenge, we need to do a European effort also here. But where the European effort is crucial is in fact our topic of today, new antibiotics. Whatever we do in agriculture, whatever we do in prudent use in human medicine, we have to do this. But we are already in the crisis. People are already dying every day in the hospital because no antibiotic is working. And whatever we do in prudent use, this problem will stay unless we find a new solution. And I welcome that the European Commission has invested a lot, but still there is no case. That's why it's so important to discuss innovative models of how this new drug will finally come to the market. That's why I'm very happy to chair this panel. And I would immediately like to give the floor to the next speaker. That is Dr. Jon Vlieger. He's a coordinator of European-led Factory, Director, Business Development, the Engager Foundation, and he will speak about a pre-competitive action through the European-led Factory. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, Timo, for hosting this meeting. And thanks to the previous speakers for their valuable insights into this topic. In the next few minutes, I'd like to present our experience with performing drug discovery for priority medicines in a pre-competitive and collaborative way. As Peter mentioned, I work for the Dutch Foundation Ligature, and I have the honor to serve as a coordinator for the European Lead Factory, an IMI project. Next slide, please. The European Lead Factory was established in 2013 through a joint action by all relevant stakeholders. This screenshot is taken from the Commission's website and nicely captures the essence of the ELF, an integrated platform providing innovative services, expertise, and access to industry-like infrastructure. On top of that, we have a very unique collection of chemical compounds. This all is provided essentially for free to any researcher in Europe, from academia, from research institutes, and from small and medium-sized enterprises. Next slide, please. I'm sure you're aware of the long timelines involved with the discovery and development of new medicine. It can easily take 10 to 15 years before a first idea is developed into a product actually reaching the patient. And in that light, I'm proud to be able to share some major achievements already in the field of Parkinson's, type 2 diabetes, but most relevant for today in AMR. Together with the University of Oxford, we have identified a completely new chemical series that has great promise to become an effective antibiotic. We've initiated the experiments some 6 years ago, and it's now well on its way towards first studies in men. Next slide, please. So the drug discovery infrastructure we have put in place is very versatile. It's available to all relevant stakeholders and can be put to work in those areas defined as a priority. There are a few listed here on the slide. I invite everyone, including the Commission, to ensure that the European scientific community continues to have access to such important infrastructure. It's clear from all the reports, and we've heard it this morning as well from the speakers, that we're facing a major challenge in the upcoming decade. AMR will hit us hard in terms of health, but also our economy. We're currently experiencing the COVID-19 outbreak, and although a virus is not a bacteria, the overall impact may very well be similar or even worse. We're now in the position to jointly prepare ourselves and make sure that we have an effective new antibiotics available by then. But in order to be in time, and I cannot stress this enough, we need to implement an integrated approach which is fully funded from start to end. Now allow me to present some views on such an integrated approach. Next slide, please. When you look at the cascade of drug discovery, development, and actually access to patients, each part has its own challenges. While there's certainly a lack of activities in early discovery phases, for sure there's lack of incentives for the later stage development and production parts. But these two are tied together. Addressing only one does not make sense if the other one is not addressed as well. It's also clear that there's no single organization or framework able to cover the full process, really from start to end. Next slide, please. And that's exactly how we came to this model, involving all essential stakeholders in the process. There's a lot of great early research going on in academia, research institutes, and initiatives such as the European Lead Factory subsequently translate these findings into actual starting points for drug development. And these findings, with dedicated support for AMR programs, part of Horizon Europe, part of potentially, hopefully, investment by the European Investment Bank and Fund, can actually move those candidates forward. And this will allow biotech companies, pharma companies, product development partnerships to do what they can do best, bring these products to patients. Next slide, please. Now we need to agree on directions forward. Today, maybe in the aftermath of this meeting. And please, let's not fall back on patchwork funding ideas. Fund something here, fund something there. That will not do the job. So only with the full process in mind and unlocking the required funds and expertise, we can tackle this together. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to take any questions in the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was, I think, a clear message, no patchwork funding, but a more systematic approach. I fully agree with that. Yeah, it's a pleasure to introduce the next speaker. This is Dr. Mark Gietzinger, and he will speak the role of SMEs. He's the Vice President of BEA. Biotech companies in Europe are combating antimicrobial resistance. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the introduction and for the organizers for having us as speaker here. Yes, as Vice President of the BEAM Alliance, I actually speak for 55 small and medium-sized companies from the European continent and Israel that are still active in the space of AMR drug development and discovery. One of the first questions that we have to answer is how crucial are actually SMEs in this field? And for this, we can have a look at the Pew Charitable Trust pipeline, where they look at the 41 only antibiotics that are currently in clinical development. Out of these 41, a striking one development candidate is actually developed by a large pharmaceutical company. All other 40 are developed by SMEs. And if we realize this, then the next question is, what is the problem of SMEs? We are all non-revenue making companies dependent on external financing during these development periods. As of today, no single SME around the globe is able to survive without significant grant or push funding, which is actually a complete disaster. And this is due to the fact that the classical ways, venture capitals and private equity, have entirely left the field of antimicrobial drug development because of recent failures of, for instance, US listed companies that had marketed antibiotics in their portfolio and the generally broken economic model. So what needs to be done? I think in our view, it is absolutely obvious that we need to fix the economic model to attract the private sector again, and we need to do it now. We have seriously enough reports. And what do politicians need to do in this space? It is actually to establish immediately new guardrails and incentives for an antibiotic reimbursement that will be largely detached from sales volume, but rather supporting sustainable use, and actually look at the new market segmentation that we have, because we have patients that suffer from drug-resistant infections and some from drug-susceptible infections, and new antibiotics need to be limited to the drug-resistant space. So these guardrails can be, as Lord O'Neill has already reported 4 years back, market entry awards, subscription models, maybe orphan drug-like acts, or any blend of those, but it's important that they come now. Adequate pricing also plays a role in this sector, in our view, simply because it actually would support also sustainable use, sustainable production of antibiotics, and it would also actually show that these life-saving drugs play an important role in our medical healthcare system. In our view, it is not an option to leave the entire sector only to the public hand. The sector is too large for this. It's too many different indications. It is too crucial for the global medical healthcare system. So we really want to and need to attract the private sector again. It was mentioned on several occasions in this meeting already. What do we learn from COVID and the current pandemic around this? I think the first learning is obviously that we realize infectious diseases have a massive impact on our health, but also on the economies. The next learning is that AMR is actually directly linked also to a viral infection like COVID. We see an incredible increase of antibiotic use during this pandemic, and we also see actually reports that ventilated COVID patients are suffering from bacterial co-infections, and if the patient is in the unlucky situation that this happens, survival rate is nearly zero. Another learning is that prevention and preparedness is significantly cheaper than reaction. And I want to give you a quick example of Switzerland, the country where I currently live in. Within 2 weeks into the lockdown, the government has actually mobilized 40 billion for economic aid packages. Looking at Lord O'Neill's report, for 2 billion market entry award per product, in AMR, that would mean that we would have 20 new products globally available, which arguably would solve the problem for 2 decades. In the meantime, Switzerland has added to this package another 40 billion since yesterday, using that portion only for our research and development of vaccines and treatments for COVID-like viruses and other viruses that are known to jump animal kingdoms to human. I think we would be in a significantly better situation today. Why do I mention this? Because it is absolutely clear evidence that it cannot be on the monetary side that we are not prepared. There is no excuse. Now, let's have a look at the EU role and the EU funding that has been mentioned beforehand by other speakers. We do believe that the EU does play a very important and significant and impactful role in actually funding this space and helping this space. However, there's quite a few things as well that we would like to mention that can be improved. I think number one is that according to the Global AMR Hub dashboard, the EU AMR dedicated funding is currently decreasing. Since 2017 to 2020, we have come from 220 million annually to 130. Why is this the case? While we are all recognizing that actually the situation is worsening. My own company is actually a participant in the IMI2 program, and I can tell you that the impact is extremely positive and it's great. The question that we have is, why are there only so few SMEs? Out of the 440 million IMI funding that comes from the EU directly over the past years, we estimate that only 25 to 30 million have actually gone to SMEs, less than 10%. Wow. At the same time, if we look at Horizon 2020 calls, we had very few calls directed at AMR and even fewer that SMEs could benefit from. The SME vehicle of the EU Commission is actually mostly not suitable for biotech and AMR due to technology readiness levels. So if we compare this to another initiative that has been initiated by Wellcome Trust in the US government and also supported by the German government, which is CARB-X, we see that within 3 years, 220 million have funded 60 projects of roughly 50 SMEs. In these 3 years, we have already 4 end of phase 1 programs and 2 diagnostic programs ready for validation. I think I would like to leave this webinar with 3 key messages. Number one is SMEs are your most important player for novel AMR products. I think this is undisputed. Number two, new reimbursement models are absolutely needed and immediately needed. We don't need reports, we need action now. And the third one is EU push funding is important and should continue to be significant. But Beam Alliance and others will be very happy to work with the respective stakeholders to see if we can make actually the funding more effective to the most important stakeholder group in this sector, which are small and medium-sized companies. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. We in the European Parliament in general value SMEs, but we have learned that in this particular area, it is even more important. Yeah, next speaker is addressing a very specific but very interesting way how to address EMR, the idea to use Phages, so a specific kind of virus that will address the bacteria. Our speaker is Dr. Jean-Paul Kirnay, head of the Laboratory and Cellular Technology, Queen Astrid Military Hospital in Belgium, and an executive board member of Phages. So you can explain what it means in technical terms, but also what this consortium means. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all for having me during lunchtime. I hope you will not have me for lunch. Now, what are bacteriophages? We also call them phages for short. These are viruses of bacteria. It's important to say that they cannot infect humans. And since the beginning of life on Earth, they control the growth and the spread of bacteria. They are the most ubiquitous lifelike entities on Earth. They are the controllers of bacteria. Now, how do they work? Now, I hope you can see the slide. On the slide, you will see several phages in green, blue, and you also see a part of one bacterium in yellow, brownish. Now, what will happen is the phages will bind to the bacterium, and then a syringe-like tail will inject the phage genome, mostly DNA, into the bacterium. And then after about 30 minutes or so, this genome will hijack the machinery of the bacterium, which will be forced to produce only copies of the phage. Now, the phage progeny, which is usually around 100 to 1,000 phages, then bursts out of the bacterium, killing the bacterium. And this progeny will then go out to find new bacteria to infect. I think it's also very important to say that phages are very specific about which bacteria they infect. So one phage will at best infect a part of one species of bacteria. It's also important to say that phages need bacteria, otherwise they will not exist. But this also means that they will impose some selection for resistant bacteria. But no worries, because in contrast to antibiotics, these phages can evolve to overcome this bacterial resistance. Now, how do we use them in therapy? There are two approaches to use them in therapy. The first one, which you could call a one-size-fits-all approach, will use cocktails of phages, and these cocktails are supposed to target the majority of the bacteria that will cause infection in certain indications. But the problem is that truly broad-spectrum phage cocktails will need a large amount of phages. And also these cocktails need to be regularly updated to respond to the changing bacterial population, emergence of resistance. Then there is the second approach, and that one could call a precision or personalized approach. And there, instead of using cocktails, we would select one or more phages from a phage bank, and then possibly, if you have time, to train those phages to be more effective against the bacteria of the patient. Now, this second approach is bound to be more effective and also sustainable. But there's also a but here. It is not compatible with the current medicinal product licensing pathways, which require many years, many millions of euros, and this per phage, because each phage is a medicinal product. So you can see this pathway on the right part of the slide. Now, also important to say is that these phages, there are indications that they can be used most effectively in combination with other antimicrobials, such as antibiotics. So you use both. Now, who develops phages today? Now, let's look at the field of agriculture and food decontamination. There we see that mainly in the US and China, there are some companies with some products on the market. And these companies are now using this as a trampoline to go to the human application field. Now, let's look at this human application field. When we look at the former Soviet Union, for instance, we see that there, and in several countries like Georgia, Russia, Ukraine, phages are available in pharmacies. But in the EU, there are no phage products on the market. Yet, there are some sporadic uses of phages in desperate patients. And also, there is medical tourism to places where they have phages in pharmacies. In Poland, which is part of the EU, there is a law regulating experimental phage therapy in one institute. And finally, in Belgium, since short, we have what we call the Magister Phage Regulatory Framework. How does this work? Well, phages are produced according to a monograph, which is some kind of a recipe. Then they are integrated into magister preparation by a pharmacist, and this upon prescription by a physician. Today, the framework is running. It's financed by Belgian Defense and university hospitals. So finally, what is holding back phage therapy in the EU? Well, I would say mostly the classification of phages as medicinal products, which is killing personalized, sustainable approaches. And what can we do to favorize the development of phages in the EU? Well, I think first we need to fund fundamental research, as well as controlled clinical trials. We need to show efficacy. And currently, research proposals that deviate from EU's classification as medicinal product are not bound to get funded by EU easily. And we need a dedicated framework, but this will take time. So meanwhile, we could consider magistral phages, and to go very rapidly, we could try to include an adapted version of the Belgian monograph into the European pharmacopoeia. If we do this, all EU countries could use phages as magistral preparations. So thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting approach. And by coincidence, I just received a question which I can immediately ask our next speaker, so that we merge already the Q&As, because we have not so much time. Our next speaker is Florian Schmidt, Deputy Head of the Unit for Medicine in the European Commission. And yeah, of course, we want general contribution, but there is a direct question. What is the EC planning to improve phages development in the European Union? And I would also ask all of the others around, yeah, is the assessment of Jean-Paul, is it shared? Is it really a promising development, or do you see other technologies more easy to achieve our target? Maybe Florian Schmidt can answer this, but maybe somebody else can also come in at a later stage. So the floor is yours, Mr. Schmidt.
Sorry, Mr. Schmidt, you need to enable your microphone. I've enabled it for you as well. There we go. See, it's now active.
Maybe. Okay, can you speak, Mr. Schmidt? Please start. If there's a technical problem, maybe we will go to the question and answers and then come back if Mr. Schmidt is ready. We have a question that is addressed to the research, and the question, why did the European Commission not support SMEs in the past, as it was mentioned? We have also a more general question, what ways and means the European Commission has to support the issue, especially how can scientists address the European Union research program Horizon Europe? I would suggest that the second question will be answered in writing, because it may be important to have complete information, the links and so on. But the first question I would address to DG Research. And then I have a question to Timo and myself, to two MEPs. How can the European Union ensure that doctors do not prescribe antibiotics premature or excessive? And what will the new pharmaceutical strategy give as opportunities to address our problem? I will give my answer immediately, and then maybe Timo can come back in his final remarks also on these two questions. So what can the European Union do to avoid imprudent use of antibiotics? We can do a lot, and legally it's possible to regulate the use of antibiotics in Europe and in any private. As I said, we regulated veterinary medicine, and this was based on Article 114 Common Market and 168 Human Health. So we regulate animals because of human health. That's right, because we have the One Health approach, but we can also regulate human health with the same application. The problem is that until now, health ministers were not ready to accept competence on health. It exists, but it was not exercised. So I think we need to be much more clear now. Member states should address this problem. If not, the European Parliament has already agreed that someday we will make a European legislation. I think it's urgently needed. And the pharmaceutical strategy, alongside with the recovery program, will give a lot of opportunities. And I think we should work together and make a very clear proposal how the European Commission should support all the initiatives that were mentioned today. So, is Mr. Schmidt now able to speak, or did we lose him completely? If he's not yet here, I would give the floor to DG Research, because there was this very concrete question why SMEs were not supported as they should be.
Mr. Schmidt.
So this is Arjon van Engel from DG Research. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer this question. So I first would like to have one comment, because Mr. Gitzinger gave a nice overview, of course, of the importance of SMEs and the role that they play, and we fully recognize that. He also mentioned the fact that there's a decreasing funding for AMR coming from the European Commission, and I would like to comment a little bit on that, because the annual investment is not the same. And actually, we recently launched the AMR accelerator with a budget of 300 million under IMI, which is not taken into these calculations, and we currently have a work program with 5 topics on antimicrobial resistance open, where we are going to fund a whole series of projects. So I just want to make clear that the funding is not actually every year the same, and that therefore you see some fluctuations. So now coming back to the support of SMEs. To be honest, SMEs are supported, and there are different tools that we have to support the SMEs. Not all of them are always suitable for every SME. That is, of course, clear, because it depends on the situation of the particular SME. But what I want to stress is that under our work program, we really like to have our SMEs participating in the proposals. The funding that goes out, the public funding that goes out via the Innovative Medicine Initiative, is specifically for SMEs and academics, so it's not going to the large pharmaceutical industry. They come in with their own in-kind funding. Then we also have a collaboration with the European Investment Bank via what is called Innofin Infectious Diseases, and that is also specifically suited for SMEs. So there are opportunities for SMEs to get funded, but as I said, it will depend on the specific circumstances of the SME if that type of funding is suitable for them.
Okay.
Am I allowed to comment on 2 points?
Of course.
Thank you very much for the clarification. And again, I think it is clear, and we also state that, and my very own company is benefiting from the IMI2 program. So yes, we confirm that the EU funding is already supporting SMEs, but we see that the relation is probably a little bit out of what we would rather like to see. And then also on the infectious disease Innofin program with EIB, we have realized that at least for the last 2 years, not a single one in AMR has been granted anymore. So these are the questions where we think we're not saying that the programs are not active, but where we probably would like to seek the dialogue to see how can we make them more effective.
Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I don't see Mr. Schmidt, so I would suggest that his contribution will be distributed to all the participants along with some explanation what kind of funding in concrete is possible and how scientists, companies could apply for this. We are already at the end of the seminar, and unless there is a very urgent request to come in from anyone, I would again give the floor. Now there is one more question coming in. Let me just check what it's exactly. No. Yeah, if state-owned enterprise must deal with antibiotic production, what should that enterprise look like and how much funding is required? I think that is a question for one of our first speakers. Who wants to come in for that? Yeah, please, Jim.
I'm not sure if it is geared towards me, but my answer is I've no idea what the amount is. All I know, and I recognise the point you replied in response to me, Melanie, about not comparing deaths. All I know is in the 4 years since my review finished, the urgency of the need for some serious attention by policymakers has accelerated. And if I may also reflect in that answer, more support for what Mark said, there has been a lot of initiatives done to support so-called early stage funding, in fact, equivalent to the amounts of what we requested. But without the proper pull incentives, as we are witnessing by the month, the whole market collapses. And so unless what is being discussed in Congress in the next few weeks actually gets passed, in which case my view is the EU should come up with their own similar market entry rewards, which would completely activate the market for everything. You will end up having to spend much more than that amount of money coming up with your own nationally owned entity.
Okay, thank you very much. And as I said, we are approaching the end of our meeting. I think it was very helpful, but it's also very clear that we have to continue the work. I think it's a huge opportunity with the European Recovery Plan, with the new dynamic that we have in the area of health. I think every citizen and every politician stands up. More cooperation in the health area is needed. The European Union, these antibiotic resistant bacteria, they don't respect any border, like the coronavirus, rightly said by Timo. And I think we should use this opportunity, continue our cooperation, and many issues that has not been possible before Corona will be possible after Corona, because this was a wake-up call. And I think we should use it and work together. Thank you to everybody that contributed. And I give the floor again to Timo.
Yes. Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to all panelists. First of all, my apologies for my camera. There seems to be a loose contact or something. I hope you can see me during this closing remark. I think we have heard various inputs from the speakers today that point towards different phases of the solution in fighting AMR. All are relevant and must be considered together, ideally in a holistic, integrated manner. So on the question on what can the European Union do, Peter already said that we need legislation in this regards, and I can only agree. The EU's One Health Action Plan already went into the right direction with its focus on better coordination and implementation on existing EU rules to tackle AMR, focusing on better prevention and control, promoting the prudent use of antibiotics, including the environmental aspects, which we didn't discuss today, but it's also a big problem, and trying to strengthen global partnerships on this. A good start, as I said, but unfortunately only a non-binding measure where the member states need to follow. As I mentioned in my statement in the beginning, we aim to push this topic during this legislation and put pressure on the Commission to come up with a proposal that not only gives guidelines but puts forward mandatory action, as the uptake of the Commission's recommendation is not satisfying at all. So there would have been a lot more to discuss, but I think, as Peter already said, we are running out of time. So I think the European Union has to act along these lines. If we do not learn from the COVID-19 outbreak, and we do not prepare for a next outbreak or a next AMR crisis, we will all suffer badly. So it's important that we take up the speed and act. I would like to take the opportunity to thank all of us for joining us today, and wish you all a good rest of the day. And if there are questions unanswered, please feel free to contact us or the speakers so that we can come back to you. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.